Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
I know it's a little hard to see us a bit. Maybe we can stand a little more, sit a little more straight. I kind of want to ask the most basic question first, which
Sure.
is, when that moment came when you began to realize that, you were telling jokes, I guess, at school, and you were funny, people laughed, and you could do this for a living.
It was, I guess I was considered a class clown, but I grew up in a small town in Indiana and didn't really believe that comedy was something that you could pursue. I thought that was something people in New York or Los Angeles could do. So it was something I always wanted to do. I just didn't think it was realistic. But I think when I was probably 8 or 6, I remember making my mom laugh, and it was pretty empowering. And it was also, I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and I think that was how I gained the favor of my siblings. I wasn't just a competitor for food.
But that features prominently.
Yes, it does.
Marked you. And what was that process like? How did you actually begin to go from being in school to then getting gigs doing comedy?
I graduated from college. I studied finance, and I hated it, but I was raised to seek security, and security was a stable job and all this. And I didn't really enjoy it, but I had a fear of public speaking. And so I took an improv class, and I had a great time doing that. And someone who was in the improv class was going to take this seminar on stand-up comedy. And I'd been looking for someone to kind of dare me to do it. People had dared me, but the seminar, there was some organization and there was a safety net there. So I jumped at the opportunity to do it. And that's where I did stand-up comedy the first time. I think it was 300 years ago. And so from there, I fell in love with it. And then it was just kind of finding an opportunity to do it different places.
And what was the humor that how did you find your voice of the kind of comedy that you did compared to other kinds? Did it just come naturally, or was it something you
Well, I think initially you can put labels on different type of comedy, whether it be observational or self-deprecating and stuff like that. But it was very much what I do right now was my first set. And then after that, I tried to find out what type of, they say it takes 10 years to get comfortable on stage and to find your voice. So I think I tried political, I tried being angry, I tried jumping around. And stand-up is so much of a conversation with the audience that you kind of, you eventually lead to a point where you understand, all right, this is what I'm supposed to be talking about. Maybe me as an angry guy, it's not appealing, or hearing another white guy with blonde hair talk about politics, that's not that appealing. So it was finding that voice.
And that voice, as I guess everybody knows, or at least the association, is clean comic. Is that something that happened naturally, or is that something you began to cultivate?
The clean comedy is. Yeah, I believe comedians do what they do, and then they get credit or criticism for it, whether it be being irreverent or being a clean comedian. I'm from a small town where I am not somebody who, I curse in everyday life, but if I am cursing, it would be because I stubbed my toe or. And so a lot of the jokes have been worked on, and if I'm not, if I was cursing about donuts, it would be like, is it necessary? And so, but the cursing thing, culturally coming from a small town, it wasn't, when people cursed, it was something they were very upset about, or it was someone who's, it's almost like cursing was associated with like a first draft of something. Like you can find a better adjective to describe it than.
And the comedians that are well known who do employ profanity are people like Sarah Silverman or Dave Chappelle or Louis C.K. and others. Do you feel that it's not working for? Do you not appreciate that humor?
No. Some of my favorite comics are filthy. But that's authentic for them. So if you know, and I know those comedians, and they're all brilliant, but it has to be authentic to you. So, like Lewis Black, he's a very sweet guy, but he is very angry about these topics. So when he expresses that anger, or when Chris Rock curses, it's very authentic to who they are. That's not to say I don't curse, but it just feels a little bit like, for me personally, it doesn't fit my personality. And Jesus told me not to curse.
One of the reasons, actually the original reason that I wanted to have you here, was I was very interested in the creative process of a stand-up comedian, and how you formulate a joke, how you write the joke, how you test the jokes, what works, what doesn't. And your wife Jeannie, who's here,
yes.
You work together, you write together.
Yeah,
you're the guy up there with the microphone.
Yeah, we my wife and I, who's back there, we do everything together, and typically stand-up comedians don't have writing partners, so it was something I was resistant to, but we had been working together unofficially, coming up with jokes, and it seemed insincere to not acknowledge the fact that we write everything together. But on the creative process, it changes. I wish it stayed the same. I wish it was all I have to do is sit down at a desk and come up with an idea. But it varies. Sometimes it's something I find, some people believe it's something that's annoying. Creativity is like two unrelated ideas. But it's weird. It changes. Some of it's observation, some of it's anger. Sometimes it's maybe it's repeated. It's perspective, right? It's point of view, and maybe having a different point of view on things is unique. And the irony is, like, now my wife understands my point of view, which is this kind of sloth that doesn't want to get out of bed. So she'll be like, "You would believe this, wouldn't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I would believe that." So, but coming up with comic ideas, it can change a lot, because sometimes I'll do material, or Jeannie and I will come up with material. I mean, probably 13 years ago, we were in Baltimore after a show, and she was eating lobster, and I had it's like, that's just bugs, right? Those are sea bugs. And I know I'm in Paris criticizing seafood. But so over the course of time, we would come up with material about how seafood is bugs. And sometimes that material will inform my belief system. So I had eaten seafood, but once we wrote all this seafood material, now I can't really eat seafood. But that being said, sometimes we'll come up with material, like I have this chunk on hiking, which is very anti-hiking. But now I enjoy hiking. The irony is, like, having done the research and the point of views surrounding it, it makes a lot of sense for someone who doesn't want to work out, when the alternative is you can just walk in the woods. It's like, I'd rather walk in the woods than work out. So, and what's interesting now is we've gone to, we're in Paris, so you have to go to museums, right? And I have some material on museums, and of course the initial point of view was that museums, I don't know why they're exhausting. We're just looking at something and then walking and looking at something. It's like checking your Instagram on a treadmill. But as we've gone to museums over the past 2 days, now at the age of 51, it's like I've had this realization. It's like, oh, I totally love it. I totally love museums. I mean, of course, my kids are with me, and they're like tired and sweaty and stuff like that. But so it's sometimes the material can change your point of view, and sometimes doing research on material that you think you might dislike opens it up to you.
And how much do these bits change as you start to get a feel for the material, and to what we see most recently in Cinco, the most recent conversation?
Yeah. It takes about a year to come up with material. And typically, I mean, that's the question, is like, you're never really done with a joke, but there is a fatigue, and you can lose the enthusiasm in delivering that joke.
Mm.
But then you can rediscover it. Like an example would be, I don't know which special it was, but I had all this material on weddings, because you get a wedding invitation. Again, stemming from annoyance, right? I just saw wedding invitations as these bills that were sent from friends. And I'm happily married, but in going through the process of the wedding, you have this intellectual approach to your relationship. You love the person you're with, and then you fall victim to kind of ritual and tradition that you kind of made fun of. And so I wanted to make light of that. But so that happened over, that was an attitude I had towards marriage in general. I love the institution, some of the traditions, comparing it to, and how there's this strange kind of we're going to pretend that we're prince and princess and have a party, and then we're going on an unjustified vacation. It's just absurd. But that probably came over 6 months of Jeannie and I working on the topic and taking a different look. And sometimes it's as simple as sitting on the subway and I'll have a topic, and it's always perspective. Sometimes it's just looking at the words, and I'll look at how the words are arranged, and that'll provide a different perspective on weddings or rehearsal dinners or receptions.
And you're in Paris because you have a show tomorrow night.
Yes.
As part of a larger European tour.
Yes. How
does that differ for you when you perform for foreign audiences? Are you doing the same kind of bits that you do in the United States, or?
I pretty much do. Now it's interesting because I feel as though I'm very kind of an Americana. It's frustrating because in America I'm this white male who is self-effacing, and I'm kind of a quasi dumb white guy, so that works. So I can handle these adjectives going around America. But when you travel internationally, the American adjective, that's a big one, right? So it's not ideal to carry that adjective everywhere. It changes the tone of some of my material. But that being said, I also selfishly want to travel, and I enjoy seeing other cultures, and I also feel as though seeing other cultures helps me find material about America. Mm-hmm. So I remember when I was in London and seeing how we were in London, this is 10 years ago, you bag your own groceries there, whereas in the US that would be very rare. It provided a perspective that it is insane that we have some stranger hey, I picked all this stuff out, now you put it in a bag for me. So it's going to another country it's a nice lens to look at yourself and your own culture from.
It occurs to me, we were talking a bit in the back about politics, and that you're not doing, obviously, very political comedy, but you're somebody who is in a position to see the country and see how people are in a way that, especially those of us living overseas, can't necessarily. But you're seeing how people are reacting to the kind of humor you're doing. Yeah. What have you been seeing, even if you're not doing it?
Well, it's interesting. Everyone in here is probably a Trump supporter. So, well, here's what it's. Look, this could be the whole conversation, right? This could be every conversation.
I hesitated a little because I have other questions.
No, but it's fascinating, right? Because never did you think it would be more embarrassing to be American. It's you thought fast food was something that we did. Well, I would say performing in the U.S., by the way, I'm from the Midwest, I'm from a small town, I'm from the Rust Belt. And by the way, to lose half the audience, I am a Catholic, I am a Christian, I am from a big family, all these things. But I've usually understood how people that I don't necessarily agree with have voted, and some of their point of view, I don't agree with them, but I've always understood it. The Trump thing, I don't understand, and I'm from the Rust Belt. And so that, I mean, I can make theories about it, but so for me, it's a mystery. And then there comes the question of, as a creative person, the responsibility. And so there is a level of responsibility, but there is also something of who is the best messenger for that information. So like, me saying to the people that come to my shows, if you voted for Trump, you're an idiot. I don't think that's constructive necessarily. But, I have this joke about McDonald's, which is kind of it's kind of a commentary on we all have our own McDonald's, right? And the message is, don't judge us fast food eaters. We all have one, right? And so the thing with I don't know. I personally feel like the Trump situation is, and I'm going to get this wrong, there's a cognitive dissonance where people, it's people defending the decision they've made. They're going to have to come to that conclusion. Like, the facts against it are so profound that there's going to have to, I wish it was, him saying, describing Haiti and some of these countries as as a blank hole. I wish that was the threshold that turned things around. But I think that, maybe there is something about discovering a way to communicate that. But I also feel as though, even, you talked about different styles of comedy. There is something of knowing what I can do and what I can accomplish is very strange. And also, I think getting people to the table and saying, maybe I can't say, because they're blindly following a monster, that maybe saying, all right, well, obviously racism's bad. And so maybe that's the joke. The joke is, I also, sometimes I have ideas for jokes, and I figure out, I'll use Twitter as kind of, I'll have an idea there, and then later on it'll become a joke. But, I have this idea of, I am so lazy, and so kind of, my comedy is kind of like the id, someone who just wants to sit in bed and eat bacon. But I also am, which is a quality we all have. But I do think that, and maybe there is a joke with, I joke around with my friends. I'm like, am I going to have to go in the streets and protest? Because that's not my personality. Do I really have to go and do some of this? And the reality is, probably, right? And so, but the other side of that question is, so Jim, because you are too comfortable, there's gonna be, the murdering of millions of people on the Korean Peninsula because you don't want to be uncomfortable standing outside in January. But I think that I struggle between what is constructive and, I don't know. I think Jeannie and I always have, it's an ongoing discussion. Everyone has it. It's like, what is constructive? What is adding value? What is bringing light? And I do think that I don't know how to solve this, but I do think that the people that do support Trump, whether they're Russian bots or not, will eventually come to their senses. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive. I also think in 2018 it's going to be a landslide. So, but I've been wrong so many times. Nobody, that's what's really interesting. It's nobody can sit there and say, I've never been wrong, because everyone was wrong about that election, right? So, I don't know. How was that for an answer?
When you say landslide, you mean Democratic landslide?
Yes,
right?
I think it's... But, I can't, you look at the things and you see whether it's 35% or 38%, I think those people, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I don't know I don't know what's going to change that. And maybe I kind of feel like I'm not smart enough to change those people. I can maybe get them to not become Nazis, but I don't know. You know what I mean? All right, someone's writing all this down. All right. She's like, Jim called supporters of Trump Nazis.
You mentioned using Twitter for things, and I'm curious how stand-up comedy has changed with social media in the last 10 years or so, how you use that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I started stand-up in 91, and it has changed so dramatically. And I know you just asked about social media, but it has changed from where these two guys right here can consume it. They will know more about stand-up comedy by the time they're 15 than everyone else in the room, if they're interested in it, than everyone else did by the time they were 30, because the access to it, whether it be, initially it was Comedy Central and YouTube and satellite radio, but it's changed. I have the opportunity to tour as a comedian, and it's not, a flash in the pan thing. I've been touring, doing theaters for 12 years now. So this is, and I'm not the hottest name. I'm not winning. It's because of it's a substance thing. It's like the people are going to see me do stand-up comedy, not to see what outfit I'm wearing or who I was dating, or you know what I mean. There's nothing trendy about it. It's about stand-up has become something that people can consume, whether it be with their family or on a date. It's changed a lot. And so, but social media wise, I also think podcasts have completely changed it too. But social media, it's interesting because I don't necessarily know how social media, independent of the media, because I think we end up kind of getting in our own echo chambers, right? And we end up hearing the same thing that we want to hear. Probably like most of us in this room, we probably have a lot in common. But I think social media, it's weird because I also think that doing stand-up comedy, and it's a conversation with the audience, I think it's really constructive to hear from an audience like, hey, that was offensive, or that's not funny. And that is also a tool of social media where you say something funny, and there's going to be people that are upset with anything that's be said. And I'm against censorship. It's kind of part of a comedian, but I think social media as a tool for understanding is pretty helpful. So people can do a joke. Most of the people that say things that are offensive on social media, they're not saying it to be offensive. They're saying it because they don't know it's offensive. So I think them being educated by like, hey, that is transphobic. People can sit there and go, I didn't even realize that. And so it can be an educational tool.
You act in films as well.
Yes.
There's a film coming out on Chappaquiddick.
Yes.
Where you play the DA, I think, of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Who's a friend of Ted Kennedy's. It's a drama.
Yeah. U.S. Attorney.
U.S. Attorney. Yeah. And what you're pursuing that at the same time you're doing stand-up comedy.
Yes.
What do you get out of doing that? What does that do for you? And how do you act like that when you are known so much for your stand-up? Is that an extra challenge?
I love acting so much, and it's something that I've always wanted to pursue, and I've always simultaneously pursued acting and stand-up. But so being what I love about acting, particularly in film like Chappaquiddick, is it's a different era, it's a different topic, and I love the idea of being a piece to serve not only a story but a certain moment, which is very similar to constructing a joke, but you're making yourself a piece rather than constructing a whole idea. So there is something about acting that is really rewarding, being a tool for a larger beat in a scene or a story point. But it's being a comedian who acts. I think it's interesting when there is this perception. It's like, how how can a comedian be funny? It's a rather absurd judgment, really, because I find comedians more realistic in dramas than unfunny people in comedies. Now, that's not to say that people can't do both, but I think comedians are rather sincere. I mean, obviously, there's different types of comedians, and just if I would put comedians into one bucket, I would say half of them love acting and half of them don't care about acting. So, but the ones that do love acting, it's almost reflected in their stand up. It's obviously acting's important, but I think being a comedian who acts is you see it in how they approach an acting role, but then you'll see some comedians where you're like, you should not be acting.
But it does seem that some of like Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love,
Yeah.
or Bill Murray in Tootsie, maybe when they start to do more dramatic roles, they have a certain kind of depth that maybe was unexpected.
Yeah, and I think there's also something relieving about not going for the laugh, and knowing, okay, it could be funny if I did this, but that doesn't serve the story.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That's why, like, sitcoms are, they can be entertaining, but they're not as rewarding as a drama that really kind of, like, your heart almost feels a fatigue afterwards.
We do have these two books in front of us here.
Yes.
And tell us a bit about writing them and what that was like, and how that differs from stand-up.
Well, I would say, I mean, first of all, neither of these books would be made without my wife being my writing partner, because we never argued once. No, well, Dad is Fat was something that when we started having these children, I didn't have them, she had them, and there was a flood of material and observations that came out, and some of it came out in tweets and this ongoing discussion. And as a comedian, when I started, I would see comedians talk about their wives or their husbands and their kids, and being a 24-year-old guy who couldn't get a date, I was like, I don't care about this. So I promised myself that my whole act wouldn't be about being a parent or my children. And so I wanted an outlet for all this material. And Jeannie and I had come up with some tweets, but we also knew that there were essays, and it was initially kind of a challenge. Like, I wanted to, because as a comedian, your approach, they're like, write a book, get this check. You can even have that guy write it. And I didn't want to do one of those where it wasn't written by me or me and Jeannie. And so, and we wanted it to be of a certain quality. That's not to say I'm a great writer or anything, but we wanted it to be a book that we would want to read. Because as a comedian, you have friends that write books, and you're like, I hope you enjoyed the check, because the book is not great. So we approached it from that. And then the food, A Love Story, was very much, I mean, I never even grew up, I wasn't that obsessed about food as a kid. I don't think I was, but it was something in my late 30s where there was this obsession. And I also, it was immediately universal as a comedy topic. I didn't have to stop and explain to an audience what bacon was. They knew. Or, and you could have a strong point of view on food, and it wouldn't alienate anyone. Because, like, there are comedians that, I mean, I consider myself a New York City comedian, which is, when I started in the 90s, the things that describe a New York City comedian are that the audience, you could have like 3 Israelis, 2 Finnish guys, and a nun, and you had to make all of them laugh. And so that was the task. And it was also that material was king rather than performance. Mm-hmm. So, and you'll see this in like comedians like Dave Attell, where like the material is important. It doesn't matter if they like you or not. It's about the material. And so, but but on food, it was something that, so in other words, if I did get this diverse, unique audience, they would all kind of understand, even if they didn't like something, they knew someone that, for instance, had that attitude towards cake. Do you know what I mean? Or they had observed the human reaction to cake. Do you know what I mean?
The human reaction to cake.
Yes.
I'm sure there's questions in the audience. If anyone has one, please raise your hand.
Not one question.
Yeah, no. Sir, go ahead.
I have a question. Reading about your background, it reminded me of the fact that you're Catholic and that you bring your children with you to your performances. It just reminded me of Bob Newhart.
Oh, really?
He always did when he went to Vegas in the 60s. He always had, and they always went to church on Sunday.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Extraordinary,
Yeah.
especially at that time for 50s and 60s for him to be 60s, I guess, for him to be doing that.
Yeah.
So
And he's from the Midwest, too.
and he's also from the Midwest. So I guess one question was if you had any relationship with him or anything like that.
Well, I always loved Bob Newhart. I mean, it was, those television shows were very impactful on me. And I think when I had this initial show, Welcome to New York, and when there was, when there were reviews of the show, I mean, it was I played a weatherman, so people compared me to Letterman in the show, and Letterman produced the show, so people thought that. But I feel like Bob Newhart was a big influence. And also, like, he's a great example. Like, Bob Newhart's, best friend was Don Rickles, and those guys had completely different styles of comedy, but their styles of comedy were completely authentic to themselves. So there is something about, and you got to find, and Bob, I'll say it like I know him. He found his voice immediately, which is pretty amazing. So, but that's very flattering. Yeah.
I was also wondering, connected to that, you were talking about your audiences, and both of your humors are apolitical.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering one thing I was thinking about, are comedians, the audience that you get, do you get a lot of people that are maybe Trump supporters or not Trump supporters, but majority, or if you even know that, or if in general comedians tend to get liberal audiences?
Well, it's changed. I feel like comedy used to be, and this is my opinion, comedy used to be, it's changed a little bit into echo chambers, where I think my audience is looking more like me, but whereas like when Chris Rock was the biggest comedian in the country or in the world, not everyone looked like Chris Rock that liked Chris Rock. And the same with Seinfeld, the same with Roseanne, and it's become kind of more like, more specialized, I think. But that being said, I used to always say in interviews that my audience, I love the diversity, that there was the Mormon family next to the lesbian couple. But I think there's, I feel like audiences, and I was talking a little bit about this before. I mean, here's one of the things I experienced when Trump, like the guy who opens for me, who's a great comedian, he was involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. He's very focused on social justice, and he had material about politics prior to the election. And we toured around, and it went well everywhere. In Texas, I jokingly say not Knoxville, Tennessee, but everywhere else in the country. And then once the election happened, he had these very intelligent jokes. They were kind of not necessarily anti-Trump or anti-Hillary. They were just political material. And there ended up being this pushback. So there was that thing that occurred where, and what we ended up kind of, comedians talk about this all the time, I kind of described it as when people hear about politics in comedy shows, they end up looking at the ceiling. Now, that's not to say that people in the audience are Trump supporters, because we'd be doing shows in San Francisco and Boston. There was a fatigue about hearing about this, because these issues are so important that people were like, all right, please, can I have 1 hour where I'm not faced with the reality? Now, that's not to say that you don't want to be complicit, but we all know that these things happen. And by the way, there's another belief that there's a new scandal every half a day, right? but there is something about, let's have a break from that. I'm here with my date, or I'm here with my kid, or I'm here with my mom. Can you just make us laugh? But I don't know. It'll change. Like I think the answer to that question might be different in 3 months, or I maybe would have answered that differently 6 months ago. Anyway, I'm a great guy.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you could talk about any struggles in your career. Like, have you always made a living doing this, or did you have other jobs?
Oh yeah, no, I would say that I worked my day job. I was a copywriter in advertising, and I intentionally kept my day job, years after everyone else had, because I wanted to keep I wanted to be able to afford to fly home for Thanksgiving and stuff like that. But, and some security. I think I was raised to have that security thing. But I would say the biggest struggle I had was, I think I dealt with, anger and jealousy of not having control over where I was in my career. And the irony is, of course, once I was in therapy, and I dealt with like frustration and anger. And once I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this because I want to do this. That's when I started having some success. So it was, I went into stand-up. I fell in love with it. I love acting. But I think when I struggled with, what are the expectations of what's fulfilling? So I think, that's something that a lot of people in the entertainment industry deal with, is like the other people's expectations. Oh, you're a comedian, you should be on the Tonight Show. And if you aren't on the Tonight Show, are you supposed to feel like a failure? Or is the fact that you're performing stand-up comedy and you have the courage to do that, isn't that pretty fulfilling? So anyway, I'm again a great guy. Well, all right, so the question was, do you have material that you do that they don't get, but you still do? And then how much does the audience dictate what your show is? I would say the interesting thing is, I think Jeannie and I were on like our 7th or 8th hour. And the problem is that, some comedians, 30 years ago, with the exception of George Carlin or a select few, they would just do the same material all the time. But comedians, and I love it, every year they have a new hour, or they should. Right? If you're going to a show and you've seen someone on Netflix, if you're going to see them live, it shouldn't be the Netflix show. It should be something different. But so that being said, the interesting thing is also, for a comedian, it's fun to challenge your audience. So there's topics that, and comedians do it in a different way. Some comedians, like if you say you can't curse, the first thing they're going to do is curse, right? But there's certain topics, and you'll see it if you pull up a special on, sometimes the first line someone will say during a special, you'll be like, why would you say that? And it's just kind of, to put a stick in the bee's nest, right? And so we'll do that. There'll be like topics, like you can look at any of my specials, and the list of the topics, it'll be like, oh, steak, bacon, cancer. And you're like, why is there, because some of it is, you want to challenge yourself, but you also want to challenge your audience. Like, come on, we can make this funny. And so that being said, some of it's self-assigned. And, my wife, everyone stare at her. My wife, in April, it was discovered she had a brain tumor. And it's removed, and obviously she's here with us and doing okay. But so that topic that made everyone grow quiet is in the new show, and Jeannie and I during all that, we're coming up with material, and some of it is cathartic, and some of it is this tense thing. Let's make that funny. So that being said, it's maybe initially you want the audience to like you, but there's the balancing act of like, all right, I'm going to talk to you about something that shouldn't be that funny, but hopefully I have gained some skills where I can make a lot of topics funny. Now, that being said, there are some places where sometimes there's topics, like I have jokes about Jesus and stuff like that and religion. And it's interesting because, say, you'll do those. I remember doing jokes about religion in San Francisco, and people would be like upset, like, uh-oh, he's a religious freak. And then those same jokes, I would do them in, say, Atlanta, and they'd be like, uh-oh, he's making fun of Jesus. And in neither case is that what was happening, but out of habit. So, like, there is something of challenging people. And even, politics stuff, there is, in this hour, I have a thing where I talk about how I look the way I look. Like, I didn't vote for Trump, but the week after the election, I walked around New York City and everyone looked at me like, you did it. And I was like, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And so, like, if you do that joke, I've done that joke in places that definitely voted for Trump. And so what I'm communicating to them is I didn't vote for Trump and that people don't like Trump, but they're laughing because it's an observation about human behavior and about me looking like a right-winger. It's if I was just doing what the audience liked, they wouldn't like, they want to be challenged a little bit, just like they want to hear new material. There's kind of an unwritten agreement where, I want it to be new, I want it to be familiar, but I mostly want it to be good, so.
I know you're great.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, one French comedian said, we can laugh at everything, but not with everyone. Did you, during your writing exercise or preparing a show, refrain yourself from going to a certain joke or?
Oh, for here?
No.
Oh.
In your career.
Oh. The whole censorship thing, it's weird because there's two ways to look at this. It's like, one, anything can be made funny, and any topic and any person can be funny. But that being said, there's censorship in everything, There's self-ascribed censorship, right? So, like, on the evening news, they're not like, holy shit, there was an earthquake. They're like, there was an earthquake, So people have a certain level of censorship that they employ, but I don't know. I do, but some of it is, it's almost the fun of the surprise sometimes. And doing stand-up, there's also, as you do it longer, I think you kind of develop skills on talking about certain topics. So talking about the medical issues that Jeannie encountered last year is not something I would have been able to do on stage 10 years ago, right, Jeannie?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, also, I wanted to add something to
Yeah.
that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Basically, there's also the censorship when you have two people that I might say something like, that might be offensive to women. Or
Oh, yes.
something that's really not intended to be offensive. So having two people, it sometimes really helps because, like, Jim made a comment once about women's nails, getting the manicures.
Yeah.
But it came off as sexist because he implied that there's no guys looking at a woman being like, oh, sorry, your nails aren't done, I'm not going to go out with you. But some females were offended because they thought that implies that women are only getting their nails done to impress the men.
Right.
So it's a very complex society right now, so sometimes having another person to say, okay, that's funny, I know you're funny, but I'm gonna have to censor you on that one because it could be interpreted. So, but then he's his own person, so he can choose
Yeah.
to do that joke anyway. But
Yeah.
just to hear from the wife sometimes.
Yes, you're right.
Do you have any favorite stand-up comedians?
Well, I go through. I like a lot of them. You know, like there's new ones, and then there's classics, and then there's you know, I mean, George Carlin. I mean, there's so much material, and then Richard Pryor from like a performance standpoint, and you know, him taking things from his everyday life and making it funny. There's probably no one better than that. But you know, I don't know. I mean, it's also I'm kind of looking at it from a you know, like making me laugh in a room, and then there's also the artistic or the substance of what they're doing. Like I do think that like I love Brian Regan, but you know, it's like in a room there's no one that can kind of make every single person laugh. And then there's also you know, when I started in the 90s, like Dave Attell would come up with 10 minutes of material. I'm not exaggerating, every single night. And it was all great material. Some of it was offensive. It wouldn't stand today, but it was seeing that comic mind at work was, and the efficiency. The other thing I would say is as a 90s comedian, and sometimes you'll do international, you know, I'm doing an international show, but like when I've done shows in London, there'll be reviews, and sometimes it'll be like, there wasn't a theme. And so as an American comedian, which is very valid, you know, but like as an American comedian from New York in the 90s, efficiency of words and jokes was the material was more important than the person. And so there's something, and also something about maybe for me it's like it being evergreen. So like political and topical stuff is funny, but it's stale within a week. You know, like there are so many scandals that we've lived through in the past 9 months that the best observation, it would, if it was said here, you'd be like, well, that's not as funny, but the moment it was said, it was probably brilliant. Whereas if you deal with evergreen topics, it's kind of fun. It's fun that, like, you know, Beyond the Pale was 2006, you know, and I was 20. No, I mean, I wish I was 20. And so, but like, it's still something that people can watch. Anyway.
I think we have time for one more question, so we have time for books. Yes, ma'am.
I think you're going to be performing in English, but do you think the audience that you're going to be performing in front of here is mostly French? And do you change your humor because of the question of whether humor travels across culture?
Yeah, I think the audience tomorrow night will be a lot of you. No, I think it's going to be probably mostly Americans, but and English speakers. But I think that, I don't know. I think, you know, we did some shows in Japan, and so there would be like Japanese girlfriends or boyfriends or spouses that were there. But I don't know. I mean, I would love it if it was French people that spoke English, but I'm being realistic. I don't know. But like, to answer your question about comedy, I think some of it translates. I mean, hopefully Netflix will change that, but I don't know. Because I think as an American, I'm always envious of the Brits that they can come right over to the continent and perform, and it just takes us so much longer to get here. But I don't know. I think, you know, it's, you know, the theater I'm performing in is 600 people. It's not like, you know, I'm sure I won't sell it out. But like, if there was, I mean, next time I come here, no, I don't know. We'll see.
Open invitation.
If I could just say, there is a theater in Paris that started a program called One Night Stand, and it's one night a month, one English-speaking stand-up.
Oh wow, yeah. No, there's English speaking comedy here. I've seen it online. I mean, read about it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for doing
Thank
this.
you.
We'd like to give some of the books.
Oh,
Especially